Hey, you're listening to the She Did That podcast, where we highlight women of color who embody leadership, empowerment, and commitment to their community through entrepreneurship and social action. Here's where ferocity, fun, and facts all live in harmony. So stay tuned because, again, you're listening to the She Did That podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to She Did That. Just a quick intro before we get started. I sat down with Tanisha Arena, who is the Executive Director of Arise for Social Justice in Springfield and is also the host of an amazing podcast called Unapologetic through Holyoke Media. So stay tuned to check it out.
Well, I don't think, my life has been leading up to this time of being the executive director of a social justice nonprofit. I started out in corporate. Made sense. That's what everybody did that was around me. And then at one point in time, I became connected to a nonprofit organization that worked with sexual minority youth. And I became a mentor, and being in that space, it was just like, oh my gosh, I love this. I had made friends who actually got to go to work and be their whole selves and do cool things like wear rainbow boas and go to these conferences. And I just went to work in a cubicle. And I was like, okay, yeah, this pays the bills, but it didn't really grab me in a way that I wanted and needed from a job, but that was my day job and what I did to take care of things. And I knew that I wanted to get to that nonprofit space the more that I was in it, but I couldn't figure out how to make that leap because if you don't know, there's a big difference in money in the private sector and the nonprofit sector. And yeah, we need to talk about that sometimes. So in a series of unfortunate events, I was let go from my corporate job. And when I was leaving, I remember feeling relief. Like I wasn't even mad. It was just like, oh, thank God I don't have to come here tomorrow. And then I became intentional about where I was going. So I never applied for another corporate job because I was like, I'm not going back into a cubicle because I don't belong there. And I'd taken some time off. And then when I was job hunting again, I just started applying at nonprofits. And it was like, I knew I could do this work. And I was trying to figure out how to translate my corporate skills into the nonprofit sector and what that was going to look like. And I just needed somebody to give me a chance. And that did happen. I started my nonprofit career at Community Action Youth Programs in Greenfield. So I was hiking it from Springfield to Greenfield, and I worked in Greenfield, and I also worked in Northampton. So it was like I was crossing 3 counties every day, and it was like magical. So it was the best place to learn, to get training about trauma-informed care, strength-based approaches. I was working with young people. I was super happy. I had amazing leadership. And at that time, I started going to grad school at Bay Path, for nonprofit management. And it was having this education that was coming alive every day at work. All the things that I was learning in my classes, I could talk to, my director and assistant director about and see it every day. And it was like, they were by the book without even knowing they were by the book. And it was just a really great time. And it was like, eventually I reached a point where, okay, the work that I'm doing as a youth worker and the dollars and cents and things, it wasn't going to work. And especially being a grad student. So I made the decision to leave and took a job at another nonprofit that was larger and put me in a space working with adults. And it was also more like the corporate feeling nonprofit, which I liked because I'm from corporate. And I thought Community Action was a really big nonprofit, which it is, but then to go to an even bigger one and have some additional experiences of training and support and travel and just the exposure. And I was also wrapping up my grad school education by that point. So I'd graduated and I was on a business trip in California when I got this email talking about Arise is looking for an ED. And I remember thinking to myself, does anybody graduate and like just become an ED? Does that happen? And yes, they do, because I did that.
You did
So
that.
I did that. I reached out and like, I think I want to do this. And the person at the time was like, oh my God, yeah, you would be perfect. You should do this and I'll help you. And I applied, I answered these questions and had an interview. And it was like friends sitting in the living room talking about the things that were going on in the world. It didn't feel like an interview. And the rest is history. I came on board in October of 2018. Michael Busey had retired at that point, and I just hit the ground running. And the differences between she and I, she's a fantastic organizer who wanted nothing to do with administrative things, and I'm an admin. The paperwork, I started out as an accounting major when I was an undergrad, so it's like I can do the spreadsheet, keep the money running kind of things, and it just made sense. It was hard, and I've loved it since the first day. The work that I get to do, the people that I work with, the amount of talent and expertise that they have, and the passion for the work. It's just magical. Like every day, it's hard, but it's so worth it, and it's far from being in the cubicle. Like I don't have that feeling anymore. And I used to joke with my friends in corporate that I was experiencing cubicle death. Like I would go in there and like feel like I was dying. And they're like, you just don't belong here. And I didn't. I just didn't fit.
And sometimes where you don't fit in is perfect, because then you're pushed into the place where you feel where you most belong. And
Absolutely.
there's no more greater feeling than feeling happy in the place that you work, you know? So I definitely do agree with that. And I really want to kind of dig into this concept of like you just getting it and going from graduate school all the way into an ED position. Like, I mean, I know even myself, I know a lot of people out here who would be like, I don't know, like, how they always, experience, like, what did you tell yourself when you were like, I'm going to apply? I'm going to throw my hat into the ring and see what happens. Like, was there any mantra that you were putting
I
together?
just did it. I mean, I read it and it was like, I could do that. It just, it just made sense. And I think it was like the perfect timing of things. Yeah, because I graduated in May, and then I remember interviewing in like August, and it literally just made sense. Like, who would fill this role and why? And the focus was just really the culmination of all these different passions that I'd had anyway. So it just made sense. I didn't have any doubts about applying. So it was like, okay, they're either going to call me or they're not. And I think too, because it was after, the most recent presidential election, it's like, okay, well, if this person can be the president, I think I can apply for like anything and maybe get it. Qualifications to the side. And why not? The worst thing that could happen is I wouldn't get the job. And the best thing that can happen is I would. So that's how it went.
And that is that.
And
Like,
that's
the rest is
how it went. Yeah. Yeah. It was different. And I knew it was different in terms of coming from this really big nonprofit to a grassroots organization. And that was an intentional choice. It was like, okay, so whatever's not here, I'm going to grow it. And that became my focus. How can I improve this? How can I, enhance? How can I take the things that I picked up along my own journey and insert them in this place and get it to the next level, whatever that was going to happen to be, because I'd also been cast in this really big shadow, of an organizing giant. And it's like, what was I going to do with that? And I'm not an organizer. So I was like, okay, I'm not trying to compete in this lane. I'll never be able to fill shoes like that, which is fine because I actually have my own and my own vision for the role, for, the work that we can do in Springfield. And that's totally different. And I live in a different body with a different lens. And I think that there's room for that. I also think that, Michael Ann knew that and understood. And that's why I was the person that she chose, because she did choose me.
Mm-hmm. Oh wow, that's awesome. You rarely see that transition happen where like the past ED says, you know what, you're next. You're the next one up. I want you to take this and put your own spin on it. How do you feel as being in your role in that position, in that organization, in this community? What does that mean to you? What does that look like to you?
Well, being a Black ED in an organization that's in Springfield, it's a lot of weight, it's a lot of responsibility. I mean, even without those factors, it's still a lot of responsibility because it's being the successor of the founder of an organization who had done so many things, in her life for Springfield. And that made it heavy just from day one. And the amount of responsibility and accountability to community, and then being myself, it's like, okay, I'm Black. We're going to talk about Black people things. We are marginalized in the community, the most impacted by decisions that get made, and bringing in this lens to talk about intersectionality, to talk about trauma, to talk about the historical context for, a lot of the policies, the laws, like the things that we're seeing in our community, and to shed light on that part. I've got amazing organizers and they know how to organize, but how do they handle the challenges that come with organizing, the psychological pieces, and where do they get support for that? And the only way I could know about that is my own entryway into the nonprofit sector. I got trained as much as a person could be trained about trauma and what that looks like, for different communities. Because trauma in communities of color looks a lot different than it does in other communities for a number of reasons. But can we talk about that in our nonprofit spaces in this work around social justice? So it's been important to bring that piece in there, as well as being visible, like in this way, in this body, right? Because representation matters. There aren't a lot of Black EDs, right? So one of the things that happened when I came on board, there was this group that's on Facebook and it's called EDs of Color Unicorns. Because have you ever seen a unicorn? And here we are, like the rarity, and a lot of support from there, and to just navigate in these spaces in this way, and knowing like people like me in this role really don't exist. Or if we do, we are buried under boards that don't look like us, and we have to deal with internalized racism and oppression in the organizations, in our leadership. And to be a Black woman in leadership has its own challenges as well. So we have to talk about oppression in a lot of different ways inside the organization, as well as out in the streets with systems and institutions being oppressive. So this role has been an amazing challenge and experience and learning and teaching. And even on its hardest days, I wouldn't change it. And it has felt like this is where I'm supposed to be.
I love that. That, you know what? Yes. Actually, and I really want to also get into the DEI work, which stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion, which you already know. Um, and there's a huge pickup, especially in the nonprofit sector, about diversity and bringing it to the forefront and making it more of something that more organizations want to tackle. Do you see this as a good thing, or do you see this as something, a starting point? What is your feeling about this huge pickup of attention towards it?
I think it's good. And I've been having conversations about, the reasoning for the sudden uptick, or now this is the hot topic. We've shifted away from climate justice for a little bit to talk about racial justice and the inequalities that some of us have always seen, and now other folks are just getting to the party. And I'm glad that these conversations are happening. It's unfortunate that it took as many situations as it has, that we had to watch George Floyd, get murdered, on TV, for it to get to this place, to start having these really uncomfortable conversations. But they are necessary. Like, we can't pretend that it doesn't exist. And I think it goes beyond diversity, equity, and inclusion, because the diversity is already here, right? But it's the way that people shake out, because white folks live segregated lives, like intentionally, like in their communities and even in some workspaces. When you look at boards of directors, who are the people that make policy and are in positions of power? So even if you have diversity in your room, that's great. But do you have diversity in your decision makers, your power holders? And that's where it really matters, like, because who's shaping policy? Because the policy is what is affecting the equity. And that's at the root of this. We live in a society that is very unequitable. And we've seen that in a lot of different ways, being in a pandemic and then in another pandemic at the same time. So it's this cute buzzword, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We need to go a heck of a lot deeper than we have. Because even if you say, well, we're giving up seats at the table, it still implies that certain people own the table. And it might also mean, to get to this place of equity, that the people that have traditionally owned the table and had all the seats just get up and give the table to the people who have never had the table, but also the ones that have always been affected by the decisions made at the table. And that might be something really hard for those empowered to reckon with. Like, in order for you to really change the situation and to be an ally and accomplice, you got to let go of the power that you've had. Can you relinquish it and give it to, Black and brown people?
And a lot of people struggle with that. And I definitely see that, especially within the industry that we're in. And I'm sure you see it too, where you're probably in spaces where you're trying to balance um, those who want to help, but aren't ready to relinquish that power, or trying to switch up things so that there is more equity. Um, and when you're faced with those situations, because I feel like a lot of people in general, whether you're in school, whether you're, at the workplace, you are placed in a position where you may recognize where um, there are certain energies who aren't trying to, like, make the change that we need. There are a lot of people who go into spaces and people aren't as self-aware as to how they're affecting the places that they're in. How would you, would you give them any advice? How do you deal with those energies? How do you go into a space and try to influence the energy so that we can make proper change?
Well, I think because a rise is a rise, I'm not having the traditional work experience of other people, right? It's revolutionary and unapologetic. And that's how I get to show up in these spaces. And I basically tell people exactly what it is. I don't mince words. And I think, fortunately, I haven't come across a lot of situations where there were people who didn't understand what their role is or was, and the potential for damage. And then in times where I was in those spaces, there are enough well-meaning allies and accomplices who have, like, stepped in to check other people in these ways, and also know, like, this is not a battle for you to fight. You just stay over there for a minute, and I'm going to go over here and talk to my people. And I'm just like, yep, go get your people, do the thing that you need to do. And I'm just going to be over here, and that's fine. And I think it's important to know that that's how that needs to work sometimes, because there's this fatigue that goes with this. And I'm not going to lie, I love it when white people go check on the white people, because I'm like, that's what you need to do. Go get your people, your cousins, aunties, whoever, and tell them, no, this is our job to tear down these things. And you can't put that burden on the Black and brown people, because this is the nonsense that we've created. And I love being in the spaces where there is that accountability and ownership. And even if there are folks who haven't gotten to that place, the people who are at that place, they go for the ones that aren't. And they're like, listen, come this way. This is where we're going. And if they can't get on board, then they get dismissed. And I'm not the person that has to do the dismissing. So it's felt really good. And then I also know that if I am the person that needs to do the dismissing, I feel competent enough to do that too. But again, I haven't had the experience where there are folks coming for me in that way. And I'm not sure what it is. I'm just glad that it exists. So it's been good in that way. But I think Arise traditionally has spent a lot of time, working with folks and doing, racial justice work. And if people have come to Arise and connected in that way, they're already on board. Mm-hmm. So we're not spending a lot of time educating people or having those kind of situations. And then when we do, like I said, there's enough people, they're like, nope, come on over here. You should read this book. This is some stuff I need you to check out, because if you can't do this. And it works out really well.
Ooh, that's so nice, having a space of people with affirming beliefs and who align with the mission. That's so awesome. And we have to keep more of that. How do you encourage, or what ways can young people, or just anyone who's unfamiliar with the nonprofit space, with social activism, how do they get into that space? What is the best way for people to get involved with all that is happening right now?
Well, I used to know how they would do that, but I've got to think of some new ways because of the pandemic and the way that we're engaging. Like, a lot of spaces aren't fully open. And then if they are, what does that look like? We've hosted interns, which is a great way for students to come in and get involved. We have volunteers. There are folks who, say, hey, if you're ever going to do a march, a rally, you need bodies, let us know, we'll come out, and show support. Again, in spaces where it's predominantly white and, there's like a protection almost, or just, again, to be the voices to check other white people on certain things. I think there's a lot of ways to get involved, whether it's on different campaigns. I mean, historically, the campaigns at Arise have been about the community. Like, what are the issues that are important that we should focus on, that we should protest about, that we should call our legislators and, make some noise. And I really love the energy that young people have, and are showing up in these spaces and saying, hey, we're the ones that are affected by these decisions that the adults are making, that the adults don't have to experience. So pay attention to what we have to say. And then for young people who are turning 18, register to vote, do your census, and then go and vote. Talk to your friends in these spaces, understand the political process and the power that you have as a voter, not just in national elections, but your local elections. Because a lot of the positions that impact us in a larger scale are about local people. Who's the district attorney, who's the prosecutor, who's the mayor, who's your state representative, who are your city councilors, who are the people on the school committee. Knowing who these people are and what they stand for, and then being able to call them to task is really important, critical for where we are right now. And knowing, like, what are their values? And if their values aren't in alignment with yours, if you see them doing things that is damaging to your community, you can vote them out. That's how you fire the politicians, because they work for us. And somewhere along the line, that important detail has been lost. An elected official is not doing me a favor. Like I'm doing them a favor by giving them the power to represent me and my community in spaces. And if they're not doing the things that I would like for them to do to represent me and my community in spaces, well, I'm gonna have to go with somebody else. That's my right. That's our right. Like in this society, the way that was set up, a democracy, you have to participate in your democracy in order for it to work. And we might not like some of the things, but this is how the system was set up. So instead of resisting it, let's learn how to play the game so we can get in the game and even change the rules of this game, because that's really what it is. And tear it down and make it work for us.
There you go. A word from Miss Tanisha. And honestly, that's the work. For all of you out there, that is the work that you should go out and do. Google who your local officials are, and then Google, if you are over 18, Google when the next election date is, and make sure that you plan to be there and you're prepared for whatever it is that requires it. Make sure that you are making the steps to do the work. We always require everyone else to do the work to push our society forward. Make sure that you're accountable for yourself and do your own work so that you're doing and making change like you want to. I'm so and I just want to also talk about your journey again. I want to kind of cycle back to that.
Okay.
You seem to have had this like confidence and this, just passion for all the things that you're doing now. What was the best or worst advice that you ever received, and why was it the best or the worst?
Oh my gosh. I guess the best advice was probably to just go do the things that, I'd said I wanted to do, to stop being in the background. The person that you see now is the best version of myself that I've ever been. And that has taken a lot of time, a lot of work, because I was in that cubicle and I was content to be there and just, living this life in the background and just never deciding to do the things. And I think aside from it being advice, it might have just been the observation of people around me who I really respected and watching what they were doing. And I remember when I was at youth programs, my then director had posted on her Facebook. Well, no, actually, it must have been when I was at my next job, because we were actually friends on Facebook at that point, and she had gone rock climbing, which was her thing. And it was like, she would just decide to do these things, just decide, right? And it was like this light bulb moment of, you just have to decide to do these things. Like, if this is the life that you want to have, are you making the decisions that support this life that you say you want to have? So that's how I wound up in grad school. And that's how just anything. I started going to the gym last year, and it was like I was going, and every day I would post that change was a choice, like every single day, because sometimes we have to go against a lifetime of programming to get to the places that we want to go to. And I knew for me that I had my own internal programming that held me back. The voice in my head that sometimes said that I wasn't good enough, or what if people didn't like me, or what if this thing didn't work, whatever it was. Every day I was making a choice that I needed to do these things that were super scary or really hard, or that the voice in my head said that I didn't have any business doing, because fill in the blank reason. And every day, until it just became what my life was at that point. Because now this is what I'm doing. If I say I want to lose weight, if I want to write a book, if I want to start a podcast, and I have to decide to do something, to take those steps, because otherwise it wasn't going to happen. And it was the personal responsibility piece, which when I talk about personal responsibility, I also want to make it clear, like, we're not talking about in the context of, systemic and institutional oppressions, right? Because you could try your damnedest at some things and the systems are against you and you're not going to get anywhere. And so I want to make a distinction about that. This is like, what is actually in my control? Mm-hmm. And, for a simplistic term, I'll use, diet and exercise, right? And it's like, nobody forced any bite of food into my mouth. That was a choice. And I had to decide, like, if I want to lose this weight, then I need to not eat that thing. I need to say no. I need to decide that I'm going to get up and go to the gym, or I'm going to go for that run, or I'm going to do that thing that supports the person that I say I want to be. And that's the internal switch. Like, this is who you say you want to be. Do your choices support that? Do you see yourself as that person? Because if you do, then you're going to do those things.
That's very true. And I mean, this is my last question. And because it just pinged once you said that. How do you envision that person? How do you even get to that point where you're saying, I want to be this, I want to be that, and then being able to put those choices into motion so that you can get there?
Well, I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And yeah, we become what we think about all the time. And the people that we spend like the most time with around us. And I guess I've always been an information seeker and thinking about a lot of different things all the time and being introspective. And it's like, I knew the kind of job that I wanted to have, right? It's like, if you look at the job that I have, yeah, it matches. I'm the boss. I got the corner office with the windows and I got it on my terms. So that works. But I thought about that. I was like, okay, I don't want to be in a cubicle. I want to be the boss. I don't want somebody micromanaging me. I really want to do work that matters and help people in ways that are long lasting. And I couldn't do that in the cubicle that I was in. And when I started my grad school journey, I knew I was like, I want to run something. I don't even know what it's going to be yet, but I want to run something. I don't always want to be in this role, but I knew I needed to be in that role because I wanted to also know what was happening on the ground. Like, I didn't want to be the leader that was so far removed that, well, you don't know my job. Actually, I do, because I did it. And that's why I could tell you about it and support you in it and all those other kind of things. Like, I didn't just show up out of school with no actual street credibility and now I'm your boss. I didn't want that because I'd had that experience in my corporate life. So just thinking about the kind of leader that I wanted to be. And then for my own life, it's making the choice. Like, I decided I want to be healthy. I want to be around to see my kids have kids to drive them crazy, and then I have always had this feeling of myself in my mind of like being really strong, like physically fit, and what that would mean, and going to the gym. It was like, wow, my body can do these things. And I'm really shocked and I'm going to keep doing it. I haven't broken anything yet. And it just felt good, and I believe that human beings do things that serve them, good or bad, but really just thinking about who you are and what you want to be. Like, if you took all the restrictions away, what are the things that you want to do? And then thinking about, well, how do I get there? And it's little steps. And then you realize, like, wow, I've walked a mile. I've, come so far. How do you graduate from college? One class at a time.
True.
And the time is going to go by regardless.
Yep.
So, and I guess I did have somebody tell me that a long time ago when I decided I wanted to be a doctor and go to medical school, and organic chemistry melted my brain. But what she had said to me was, regardless of what you do, the time's going to go by. 4 years is going to go by whether you go to school or not. Mm-hmm. So at the end of that time, do you want to be closer to your goals or complete it, or saying, well, gosh, if I had started 4 years ago, I'd be finished. So just, making a decision to try and keep trying, because it's one day at a time, one class at a time, one paper at a time. If you got to break it down that small, just until you get there. But if you don't try, you won't get there. If you start and you stop, you won't get there. So
that's all it takes, is one step at a time. Just take it in baby steps and you'll get there.
yeah.
Well, thank you, Tanisha, so much for joining us on She Did That, the new podcast about women's empowerment, social action, and entrepreneurship. This has been such a journey for you and I both. Also, shameless plug for Tanisha, has her own podcast as well, okay? Unapologetic. Can you please talk about that a little bit too, so that we can just have that plug in there too, so we can get people listening?
Sure. So again, making the decision to say yes to myself about things and not being in the background, I had been approached repeatedly by Natalia Munoz at Holyoke Media about doing a podcast, because we would wind up in spaces and having these conversations, and she'd say, I just want to record you. And I'm like, but why? And because I'm not really thinking about the actual impact of what I'm saying. Like I don't, it just hasn't registered still at this point of like how profound what I'm saying is, because to me, I'm like, aren't I stating the obvious? Like, am I the only person who sees this? I can't be the only person who sees this. But apparently that's not the case. So I just agreed. And then we started recording, and that's what came out. Like, we talked about what was the name going to be and how it would go. And I knew it was going to be unapologetic, because it's like, we need to talk about these things and stop sugarcoating. Just tell the truth unapologetically about everything, because how do you really make it change? Like, again, as I'd said in one of the podcasts, like, how do you correct a lie? Tell the truth. Just tell the truth, right? And it will be ugly, it hurts, and it will piss you off sometimes, but then we can heal from that place. We told the truth. An examination of whatever it happens to be. So we just started recording, and sometimes I have a specific focus. Sometimes I start out and I'm like, I have no idea what we're going to talk about today. And then Natalia hits record, and we just wind up having conversations, and magic happens. And then she does editing, and then they come out. And it's been good so far. I think it's only been like maybe 3 weeks. And there's been a tremendous response, and we just keep at it. And I have lots of material, because life is happening in these new kind of ways. And my hope is that I'm just inserting different thoughts into the conversation, or some new vantage points, or maybe even planting some seeds so somebody can walk away and say, ooh, I never thought about it like that. Because you can't change anybody's mind, right? But can just a little inkling of something turn into something bigger, and maybe cause a shift that a person can come to on their own. And if you can come to it on your own, that's likely to stay, because you're not going to argue somebody to change their mind. That's just not going to happen. But can we have an open, honest, authentic conversation about the things that are happening around us, and why they've happened around us the way that they have? And I really think that history matters, and what we're seeing is what happens when you build a life on a lie.
And that's why we have Unapologetic, to set it straight.
I said what I said.
Thank you. So I will put all of the information of where you can find Unapologetic in the description box. Again, thank you, Tanisha. We will stay tuned. We will make sure that we have people following and making sure that you're doing not making sure that you're doing what you're doing, that people are following what you're doing. And we are so honored to have you in our presence, and we need more people like you in our higher up positions. So from the She Did That family, thank you for doing all that you do, for being you, and for doing you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This is great.